Yes, it is Pro Football Weekly as we recap the 2025 NFL Draft. Mike Sy with the coach, Dave Wannstedt, the Hall of Famer, Dan Hampton, our general manager, Hub Arkush. I am Pat Boyle. Let's dive right into it. What was your biggest takeaway from that draft?
Well, I kind of referenced it last week, so I'm going to pat myself on the back. I said that I thought this would be the year of the running back, and I referenced 2017 with McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara and those guys came out, and I think it was. I mean, when you really look at it this year, last year there was one running back taken in the first two rounds of the draft. This year there were 5. So, I mean, just from a early jumping on, and I think it's Saquon Barkley. I think the impact that Barkley had with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl, I think that just got everybody's attention, and they said, you know what, we better have ourselves a good back.
Well, running backs, obviously, their value increased, but not so much quarterback. We only saw 2 in the first round. But the one thing that really jumped out at me was in half of the picks, they played in either the SEC or the Big Ten. Now, think about that. Those 2 conferences were so dominant when it came to supplying the NFL with, their personnel. But the other part of it, Hub, 30 of the first somewhat 90 picks were defensive linemen. Everybody is looking for the player that can go and get after the quarterback.
Yeah, there's no question about that with the linemen on both sides. But the one for me was the trade, guys. I mean, to give up 5, 36, 124, and a first-round pick next year for a guy who you're counting on to play both ways, and that hasn't been done in, 10, 20, 30 years in the NFL? It's a real risk, and I haven't seen anybody take as big a risk as that with a new GM in a long time.
One of the major subplots in the draft was Shedeur Sanders, and everybody's got a theory on why he dropped to the 5th round and pick 144. Why do you think it happened?
Well, I'm going to go the coaching realm, and I believe this is right because I know that Brian Daboll at the Giants, he met with all 5 quarterbacks that they were looking at drafting. They were bound and determined at some point somewhere to try to get a quarterback, to try to get one. And what he did was he sent like a mini little playbook, 10-page thing to each quarterback and said, when we get together, I want to talk about this, kind of like a game plan type of thing. Sure. And apparently when they got together, that he said, let's draw up, I write 36-hour play pass Z slant or whatever. And Sanders just wasn't ready to do that. So he called him out on it. And then Sanders, they had a discussion. It just wasn't a good fit. He didn't feel good about it as far as his preparation on that for that instance. And coaches talk. The minute that somebody finds out, you could say, oh, everything's secret. To some degree it is, but guys talk. And, the minute that somebody has something that they're not comfortable with, boy, it spreads.
When you're evaluating players, sometimes certain things mean more than others. But with a quarterback, everything means something. And all the time, you look at what these quarterbacks have done, not only during their season, but off the field, away from the game. And, he had a chance to go and play in the Senior Bowl. He refused. He had a chance to throw for the personnel at the Combine. He refused. He pushed in the face. There was a lot of reasons why he basically fell off the earth.
Guys, I think one of the most important statistics for a quarterback is completion percentage. How often he get. Well, he set a record last year at 71.4. This wasn't about his football ability. This is about where he's at this stage of his life as a young man. I don't know the Sanders. I have nothing negative to say about him. But the bottom line is that too many teams were too concerned about the lack of maturity and where he's at right now and his ability to be a teammate. And that's really what it came down to.
I'll tell you one thing. He handled himself very well with that prank call from Jeff Ulbricht's 21-year-old son, Jax. If he handles his business off the field like that, on the field, then we're going to have a comeback story.
I think this is going to be really the best thing for this kid. I mean, he's going to go in there, and there's been a lot of guys, we all know Tom Brady, but the Kirk Cousins, a lot of guys drafted 4th round or lower, and hey, it's the chip on the shoulder, and let's get to it. So this could be the blessing in disguise.
Okay, put a bow on this. Sanders is drafted by Cleveland. They drafted Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round. They add that to a quarterback room that already has Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, and an injured Deshaun Watson. That's 5 QBs. Only one can play on Sunday. How does this play out, Coach?
Yeah, one football. I hear you. You know what? I think they know what Joe Flacco can do. Let's start with him. The veteran guy, he's not going to get much work. He doesn't need many reps. They know what they can do there. I don't think Deshaun Watson will be on the team between the injury and whatever else they got going there. So I think really it's Kenny Pickett's job. I think Kenny Pickett will be the starter there, and I think they were looking for a backup. I think you don't never know if a player's going to be there. So when they took Gabriel, they did not know that Sanders would still be on the board. So they trade up and they get Sanders. I think when it's all said and done, I look for it to be Kenny Pickett, the starter, and I look for Sanders to be the backup.
All right, you guys talked about it last week. The D-line and O-line would be the strength of this draft. It played out in the first round. 9 on the defensive line were selected. 8 offensive linemen were taken in the first round. Of the 17 players taken in the trenches, pick one that jumps out to you.
Mason Graham. And maybe I'm partial for a couple reasons. One, the defensive tackle for Michigan. The guy graded out had the highest consistent grade of any defensive tackle in the draft. This guy has been played as a freshman, as a defensive lineman playing as a freshman at Michigan. You are bringing it. He's undersized a little bit, but he makes up for it with his quickness. He was and this is what really hooked me. He was a 2-time heavyweight champion wrestler in high school, which means he's got leverage, he's got heavy hands, and he is a tough guy. Kind of reminds me of a player that I recruit. I'm not going to say the name, but
you could say
undersized. Okay, Aaron Donald was undersized, and he was quick, and he was a state heavyweight wrestling champ. I'm not saying he's Aaron Donald, Hamp, but I just couldn't get away from him with all those intangibles.
Okay, the guy that jumps out at me is Josh Simmons, the big left tackle that the Kansas City Chiefs took on the 32nd pick, the last pick of the first round. And the reason, in the last 10 years, the Super Bowl has not had a blue chip performance by either team's left tackle in that game. Now remember, the Chiefs have played in 5 of the last 6. If they have a chance to go again, you better believe Josh Simmons will give them a great chance of getting that done.
Guys, my guy is the other guy, Kenneth Grant. Dave mentioned, played with Mason Graham. They're both going to be excellent NFL players. Grant may have the higher upside, I think. He is so big and so moves so well at defensive tackle. A lot of offensive linemen are going to have a hard time with this kid.
Time for our first break. On the other side, the guys tell us which team had the best first round and which team was most questionable in the first 32 selections when Pro Football Weekly continues.
Pro Football Weekly is on the air.
Welcome back to Pro Football Weekly. Hamp mentioned it off the top. 2 conferences dominated the first round. SEC had 15 players selected, and the Big Ten had a record 11 players taken out of the first 32 in this draft. So with all that being said, focusing on the first round, which team had the best first round selection?
I got to go with the Giants, not just because they had 2 picks, but I'll tell you, there were some people that thought that their first pick, Abdul Carter, the defensive end from Penn State, that he arguably could have been the #1 player in the entire draft. And let me tell you a little bit about this kid now. He was a linebacker, because they compare him a lot to Micah Parsons, the guy at Dallas, right? But this kid was a linebacker his first year at Penn State. He had 6.5 sacks, 10 tackles for losses. And then they said, you know what? Let's put you at defensive end and make you a pass rusher. And the rest is history. I mean, this guy's going to be a dominant pass rusher for the Giants. He'll be fantastic. And then they had the second pick, and they took the quarterback. They talked about taking the quarterback. They took Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, NFL background, offensive coordinator Charlie Weiss's son. So this kid's got a good foundation, and he's going to be good for. He'll be good for the Giants.
You know, the Giants, they wanted to go and find some future stars. Well, what did New England do? They fixed a problem. They had a lot of issues on the offensive line last year for Drake May, and they fixed it by going and getting Will Campbell out of LSU. 6'6", 320 pounds, great infectious type of personality. He's a hard worker. He's a glider. And you know what? At that size, it's hard to believe he has the type of footwork that he does. He reminds me of Anthony Munoz.
Guys, the rich just get richer, and I have the Eagles at 32 getting Jihad Campbell. I can't believe that he lasted that long. I think he's the best linebacker in this draft. He is not a true edge rusher, but he is a complete linebacker, and he is a good edge rusher, and the Eagles got another great player.
All right, which team had a questionable first round?
I would probably say Cincinnati. You know, I mean, I know Stewart is who they took in the first round, but I just don't know. He's got all the physical tools, size, speed, vertical jump, all that. But I'd like to see more playmaking ability. I mean, 4.5 sacks in 3 years doesn't get it from me.
You know, the San Francisco 49ers, they needed some help on defense, and I'm not really sure that they addressed it. But the thing that really jumped out to me, guys, think about this, that Andrew Berry was the general manager of the Cleveland Browns, and he was the one that made the disastrous trade for Deshaun Watson 2 years ago.
Yep.
Well, he kind of fleeced the Jaguars this year, Hub, and made himself some brownie points by getting some picks back.
Guys, the pick I like the least in the first round, Tennessee Titans, Cam Ward. Last year, with the 6 quarterbacks that were taken, I don't think Ward would have been ranked ahead of any of them. We know what you can get with those first-round picks, and that's why I thought it was a mistake.
All right, let's focus now on the second round. What prospects stood out to you taken in the second?
The one I love is Henderson, the running back. Trevion Henderson from Ohio State. This kid now, and he had to compete with Judkins, who transferred in, I talked about earlier, from Ole Miss. But let me tell you, Henderson played as a freshman at Ohio State and got himself in some of the record books. And the thing about him that's so perfect is he is a 3-down running back. He's proven that he can make the big plays running the ball. He's got great hands. He will pass block in a sophisticated scheme that they use with Ryan Day at Ohio State. So I like him. And you put him, hey, nothing helps a quarterback. Who's the quarterback? Drake May, young kid at New England. Hamp talked about him getting Will Campbell. Nothing helps a young quarterback better than a good running back, and they got one.
You know, I'm going to go with Mike Green. Mike Green from Marshall. He was rated up there with Abdul Carter as one of the great pass rushers, but he had off-the-field issues. He knocked him down. He fell into the middle of the second round. They got the Baltimore Ravens, who have been doing some great drafting the last 4 or 5 years. They get another steal.
I'll tell you guys, being a Michigan alum, I try and stay away from Michigan kids in this draft. But Will Johnson at 47, this is maybe the best defensive back in the draft. Not probably the best one, but one of the top 4. He was definitely a top 10, top 15 pick. Injury concerns dropped him to 47, but a great pick in the second round.
And, you know, I got to add to that. He went to Arizona. We were talking upstairs, Hub, you brought it up. You know, Arizona plays about 75% zone. Will Johnson is most effective when he's off playing zone and can break on the ball. So it's not just that he got drafted, but he got put in a good position with that defense that they use at Arizona.
Time for another break here. When we come back, we'll look at the totality of the NFL draft. All 7 rounds, the winners and losers from the guys when PFW rolls on.
Pro Football Weekly is on the air.
Welcome back to Pro Football Weekly. Let's factor in all 7 rounds and 257 players that were selected at Lambeau Field in Green Bay. Which team selected the best draft class? Coach, start us off.
I think Cleveland. I mean, and, you know, I pondered on the quarterbacks early, but, I mean, I think they got 4 starters out of there. Obviously, you know, I love Mason Graham, the linebacker Schlesinger. He'll be a starter somewhere. Judkins, the running back. You know, they need, obviously, a healthy running back. And then the tight end, Fanny, he's going to be a surprise. And the sleeper in this whole group, hey, this Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, running back. This guy averaged 5.9 a carry, had almost 1,500 yards last year in the Southeast Conference. He's a player. He'll make the team, too.
I'm going to look at the New York Giants, and you talked about what Brian Daboll was able to do as far as, you know, moving around and getting his quarterback of the future in Jackson Dart. But again, you pair he and Carter together, I mean, that is a super strong first round. Then in the second round, he added some interior linemen, Alexander, but Cam Scatteraboo. Cam Scatteraboo was one of my favorite guys in college football last year. He ran for about 5,000 yards in the bowl game. And I got to tell you, if Tommy DeVito had a fan cult following in Jersey, wait till they get a load of Cam.
I'm with you on Scatteraboo. I loved him in this draft.
Tommy Cutlets. And Scatteraboo's got to have a great nickname, too.
It's going to be awesome.
I'll tell you guys, what Seattle did, I thought was outstanding. They got Gray Zabel and Nick Emenwari, who are the best safety, Emenwari, and the best interior offensive lineman in the draft. And then they went deep and filled needs in every area. They probably got 2 or 3 more starters on day one and a lot of depth.
All right, looking over the 3 days of the draft, which team were you least impressed with?
Well, I hate saying this, because I'm a fan of Joe Burrow and the Bengals, but I think Cincinnati, and maybe Stewart, I mentioned him, looks the part, and maybe he'll be a great player, but he doesn't have numbers. I'm all about production. Then they took 2 linebackers and 2 offensive linemen that are solid players, but I don't know if anything's going to come in and make an impact and help them get to the Super Bowl.
The 49ers have been struggling on defense the last couple of years. Yeah, they got to find some help for Bosa. They think they got it with Mykel Williams. I spoke about him a minute ago. I wasn't impressed with him. Same thing, lack of production. But in the second round, they took Alfred Collins, a gigantic defensive tackle from Texas that did nothing. And then in the third round, they took a 5'7" quarterback. So I don't know if they helped themselves that much.
Yeah, and another team that I got thrown out is the Vikings, and it's mainly only because they only had 5 picks. They didn't have a second-round pick. They didn't have a fourth-round pick. The running back they got, Donovan Jackson, he's a nice player. He's probably going to be a pretty good player. For the 24th pick in the first round, I just can't see that. I thought it was too high.
All right, let's zoom out a little bit. Factor in the draft, free agency, and maybe a coaching change if the team made some changes with their coaches. Which team has had the most improvement this offseason?
I got to go with Mike Vrabel at the Patriots. And add Josh McDaniels with that. Mike's obviously a defensive guy. You got Vrabel on offense. Drake May, I think, impressed a lot of people, at least me last year. And now they've added some weapons, a top running back, a top offensive tackle, plus some good free agent guys, and a change of attitude. I think they could turn it real quick.
When you look at the Buffalo Bills, they've been real close. They've been on the cusp. They've been knocking on the door. They need somebody to kick it down. Well, this year they said we're going to help our defense. They only scored 28 in the AFC Championship game. It was too much. The one thing is they need to get better on defense. So their 5 picks, they got 2 great corners and 3 giant defensive linemen. This could be the year of Josh Allen and the Bills.
Well, guys, because of my history and all of our history with the Chicago Bears, I try and stay away from them on this show. But they've had an amazing off year. They've rebuilt the coaching staff. They've rebuilt the entire lineup. And they've done so much to help Caleb Williams become the quarterback they thought he could be when they took him with the first pick in the first round. I think they've had an outstanding offseason.
Wait, minute to go before the break. Which team may be heading in the wrong direction in the standings as you take a look at the offseason so far?
God, I hate to say this because I'm a fan of his, but the Jets. I mean, the Jets, they signed Justin Fields, and they got Tyrod Taylor as the backup who's been around forever. I just don't see, unless Breece Hall carries this team, it's going to be very difficult.
The Bengals were very heavy. They paid their receivers a fortune this year. They need help on the offense and defensive line. I don't think they did enough. They're going in the wrong way.
Guys, Dallas has been a top 10 team for a long time, but I don't really like anything they've done this offseason. I don't understand a lot of what they've done this offseason.
Time for our last break. More Pro Football Weekly after this.
Pro Football Weekly is on the air.
Well, welcome back to Pro Football Weekly with some help from our friends at DraftKings. We're taking a look at the Super Bowl odds. The champs are the favorites at plus 650. The Chiefs, Bills, and Ravens are next at plus 700. Coach, start us off. Who would you wager on right now to win it all?
I'm going to, at this point, I'm going to say Philadelphia and Buffalo would be my 2 teams.
That's exactly who I liked, and I called last year. I was just a little bit early on Buffalo. I think they got well in the draft this year.
I'm having a hard time picking between the Bills and the Ravens, but I think it's the Bills.
Let's take a look at what DraftKings thinks is the MVP odds at the moment right now. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, the favorites at plus 550. Coach, Who do you like to win the MVP?
I like Joe Burrow this year. I think Joe's going to have a fantastic year again.
Jaden Daniels is only going to get scarier.
This year we finally get something besides a quarterback, Saquon Barkley.
That is going to do it for this edition of Pro Football Weekly. Enjoy the summer. We will see you in August. Check your local listings for the time and day that Pro Football Weekly airs in your market.